Okay. Erev Tov, everyone. We're back in the shul.
Yeah.
Me and Martin.
Wow.
I hope nobody else has COVID and that's why they're not here. But whatever reason it is, we're continuing in the Rambam. In the Rambam La'am, we're on page Samach Beis. In the Sefiria text, section 16.1. Okay, so now we finished the 6 Shisha Sidre Mishnah and the order in which they go in. So now we're going to get to a discussion exactly what is it that Rabbi Yossi did and what was added after him and what becomes the flow from Mishnah to Gemara. That becomes the next discussion. And the first question that we have to ask is as follows. If you notice, up to now we have said that the Torah was all the way transmitted from Moshe generation to generation until today. So now Rabbi Yossi, so what do we have? We have rabbis in every generation who are analyzing the text and figuring out what Hashem wants from them and how to analyze new situations, etc., etc. So now the question now becomes, or you will notice in a moment, who does Rabbi Yossi choose to quote in the Mishne? So if you think about this, there's a lot of people he could quote. He could quote Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron, Yeshua, Pinchas. So a lot of people, a lot of big scholars that could be quoted.
Yeshua ben Nun.
But let's see who he quotes. So Roli Stapik Mishemus Hamikubolim ala Krovi Melov. So afterwards he saw fit to use the names of those who received the tradition that were close in time to him. Shimon HaTzadik, from the times of Shimon HaTzadik. So Shimon HaTzadik is starting just about at the beginning of the Second Temple era. He was Mishiore Anshe Knesset HaGedola. So give or take a bit of time. That's about 600 years before Rebbe. Give or take. Rebbe did the Mishne around 200. So, well, maybe a little less, maybe 530 years, whatever. But so from Shimon Tzaddik, Dvarav b'Mishne Davar Kotzer. The words in his Mishnah were very brief words. V'kolal inyanim rabim, that incorporated many concepts. V'haya hakol mavur lo, and everything was clear to him. Lachdod sichlo, because
Shimon HaTzadik or to
no, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, he was choosing from Shimon HaTzadik. It was all clear to him, and because he was very sharp intellect, anyone of less stature than him, the context would look very deep to them. Because the earlier authors, they wrote Latzmam for themselves. In other words, they weren't as concerned that other people wouldn't understand.
So it's like
in other words, they got the main ideas, right? Now, obviously, it's interesting. We can't just say that straight off because the Rambam says that Rabbi Yossi wrote it because it was necessary times, right? So, and why did he do this? He saw that students were getting less and less and the tourists are getting worse, et cetera, et cetera. And, therefore he had to write it. So therefore, it's not possible for us to say that they didn't care about anybody else. But I would imagine because since it was a Horah Shah, they didn't want to abuse it. In other words, just like the Chumash is very terse, and Hashem B'davka didn't want to write it anymore. So now that we're going to really be going against the rule in a Horah Shah to go writing the oral law, which we should not be doing, obviously he would be doing it in the least amount of words possible.
Right.
That's what I would think is the pshat over here. And there's no need to go any further than that.
Yeah.
And if you want to say it's going to be hard for people to understand it,
Okay.
so it's no different than the Torah is hard for people to
There
understand.
you are.
The Torah has a Torah Shebal Peh, and without the Torah Shebal Peh, we would not understand a word of the Torah.
That's right.
So the Torah Shebal Peh itself can also have a Torah Shebal Peh. And at least we've got things formulated in some kind of an order, as we already see. And now if we already have the order, so therefore people with, just like, for example, Lahavdil, we have now with the Daf Yomi, of the people trying to remember three main points for their memory to remember the text of the Gemara. And you make pictures and things like that.
Yeah.
So on an infinitely greater level, that's what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did. Now, what the Rambam does not address is, so why did he choose names from Shimon HaTzadik? It would seem all you could say was an editorial decision of the Rambam. It doesn't really explain what the editorial decision is. So one of the Meforshim on the Rambam says that Shimon HaTzadik really was on the cusp of a new era, because all people who were really important people at that time were in the Tanakh.
Yeah.
You have to know that the people on the Anshe Knesset Gdola were themselves Nevi'im.
Right.
So in other words, we have people who are listed in the Tanakh. So therefore, there's no need to write the people who are part of our overall understanding that they exist. And of course, they were part of the transmission of the Torah. So therefore, but we're starting from Shimon HaTzadik, that's already, he's Mishiorek, that's all, where he's the remnant. So that he's not a Novi anymore. So now we have to add that are not in the Torah or in the Tanakh. So therefore, that's the best answer that we've been able to come across for at this time. However, this still was a very brief amount of things that he wrote, very terse and very short. So now let us, I think we will just make a different switch in the share.
Whoa.
And let us do the following. Let us share the screen instead, the desktop. And what we will do is
What are you gonna do?
share with you this interesting thing here. I can't make it any bigger.
Okay.
I don't think I can. If it should be, probably the people in Zoom land will see it clearer than us. But this is originally was done by Chabad, but other people have done the same thing. You see how we're going to go from the Torah that Hashem gave us at Sinai.
You can click on the magnifying glass on the just above the top right of on the top right of the above the blue right hand corner. It's a little magnifying glass.
I don't have. Oh,
There you go.
hey. Shkoyach.
It looks bigger, Rabbi.
Excelente. Okay, so we start with the Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. Fine. Now, you see, we've got the Shisha Sidrei Mishne. Okay, now this is not going to be, this chart is still not perfect. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, so we got these terse comments by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Now, we've got other things which you will see. We got Brisos and Toseftas. Okay. We've got Midrashim. We've got things called Mechilta, Safra, Sifri, and we have the Zohar. Okay. Now, these are all people. Now, from the chart, it would seem that these preceded the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. And really, they did not. You have to really look at this as a three-dimensional picture if you want to look at it properly.
Yeah.
In other words, from the Torah, the next real written thing is the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Okay. Now, what all this stuff over here will eventually evolve into the Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi. As we will see, we're going to read shortly that everyone saw Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did was very brief. So where others wrote expanded versions of the Mishnayos. And that is, we'll see in a minute, Tosefta, we'll see in 1 minute. Brisa is the word Brisa means outside of the Mishnah. Okay. And then we've got Midrashim, different types of Midrashim. We have Midrashim that are more on the ethical view of things. And then we've got Midrashim that are really halachic Midrashim, which is called the Mechilta, which is commentary on Shmos, Safra on Vayikra, and Sifri B'Amid Dvar. Why is there no such thing in Bereshis? For a very obvious reason.
There's no halakha.
There's no halacha in Bereshis. So therefore that doesn't exist. So what the Rambam is going to tell us is that these Shisha Sidrei Mishnah required over time all these other additions, and then that gets formulated into the Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, okay? That further gets refined in the Tshuvos and the Sarfs, and that's still about the year 500. And then you have the Rabbanan Savuroi, which are about 200 years after that. And then we get to the Gaonim, which is around the years 900 and 1000, till we finally get to the major Rishonim, which is in the 11 and 1200s. So we see how this all evolves till we get to Halacha. Now, with this little chart, it makes it a little bit easier for us to navigate the next paragraph in the Rambam. So since Rabbi Yehuda Yossi did things so briefly, Lefikach ra echad mitalmidav. So therefore, one of his students saw it fitting. And who was that student? Who Rabbi Chia? Rabbi Chia, lechaber sefer, to author a text, a book, v'lechas bo acharabo, and to follow after his teacher in it, meaning to follow, not to walk after him, but to follow his derech. Levar ma shenishtabesh midiva rabo, and to explain what became garbled up from his Rebbe's words. The Tosefta, and that's called the Tosefta. And that's what you find in the back of every standard Vilna Shas. Vinyano, and what is the purpose of the Tosefta? Levar HaMishne, to explain the Mishnah. Okay? The Tosefta, Efshel Hotzi Taima HaMishnah, Acher Yigirab. And you can extrapolate the Tosefta's explanation if you make a lot of effort. And why did he create this? In order to teach us how to bring out issues from the mission a clearer way. And similarly, Rabbi Oshia, and so did Rabbi Oshia do the same thing. It's different versions here. Some say Hoshaya, some say Rabbi Oshia. He was a chavra of him. Rabbi Oshia and Bar Kafra, they arranged the brises. Okay, and that wasn't the picture we had before, Tosefta and Brisa. So different students had different things they wanted to elaborate on. Then we could, and also, for Rav Chiber Brisa, and Rav also comprised a Brisa, but it's a different type of a Brisa, the Safra, the Sifri. That's the Safra and the Sifri. For Ravim Zulasam, and many also did the same thing. Amru, for example, Gemaras would tell us, Ki Asa Rabbi Ploni, when Rabbi Ploni came along, Asa Vaisi Masnisivide, he brought a teaching in his hand. Okay, now for Ulam, still in all, Lahayu Ela Brises Kulam Kitsachas Divrei Mishnah. These Brises were not as smooth worded as the Mishnahs. Below Ketikun Inyana, and not as orderly. For Kotzer Milaya, and with the shortness of words. Kain Hoisa Iker. Therefore, the main text of all, Ratzalaimer, HaMishnah, the main Mishnah, V'chala Chiburim Olim Achareh. So all written things go after that. Ushnim Ala, and they're secondary to it. V'yamuchuberes Etzal Kol. It's the most honored of all Sfarim, is the Mishnah. And when you compare it to other texts like the Brises, anything, that's taking the pasuk from one of the psukim with the brachas of Yosef, that the maiden saw her, not Yossi, the maiden saw her and acclaimed her. So that's trying to say you cannot even compare one to another. And he does not bring you the rest of the pasuk. The rest of the pasuk is malachos upilakshim v'hallelujah, and kings and what do you call it? Pilakshim saw her and praised her. Okay, that's Shir Hashirim Perek Vav pasuk Tes. Whereas the Mishnah was really unbelievably great, and
So
the
we're
others.
saying it's the book right under the Torah. Other than that, it's greater than the Gemara. It's just number 2. Is that what we're saying?
Well, that any other works out. We're going to get to the Gemara soon,
Right.
right? So, but this was the key. So others, v'chol haba achareh, and everyone who came after him, achareh, achar chabura hanichperasi, after this great work, lo sam libo ma'od alispon of the Mishnah. All they did in the brises, those sentences, was trying to understand the Mishnayos. And there wasn't any generation who ceased from reflecting and explaining it. Every chacham based on his understanding. So obviously there's going to be all kinds of different understandings.
And machlokas.
They're going to disagree about some of the halachas that come with it. Due to many years that happened afterwards. Vein chabura mehem shal chikrov in his point of a Mishnah, v'golsa chidushim v'aviyim and dimyonim al inyonim acherim at shagia hazman l'Ravina Ravashi. And there was no group of rabbis that didn't reflect on the Mishnah and reveal the understandings and make all these comparisons until they took it all together until Ravina Ravashi came. They were the last ones of the rabbis of the Talmud. He boded Ravashi, and Ravashi secluded himself to arrange the Talmud for he did everything, taking all the words of people who came after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and did exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did for all the teachings that came after Moshe Rabbeinu, Ravashi, and he did the same thing for all the things that happened after Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Okay, it's very interesting. It's interesting that Ravina, who's this Ravashi rather, the Gemara says a similarity. Gemara says, just like we know from Moshe until Rebbe, there wasn't Torah Gedula Achas. More also says in getting from Rebbe until Ravashi, you didn't have someone in Torah and Gedula B'Makom Achas the same way. Okay, so the one girsa is V'hispodei, he went into seclusion, which is interesting because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi doesn't say he went into seclusion. Rather, he gathered up a whole bunch of rabbis together. Others have a different girsa of V'hispodei, which means he made a lot of effort in this, but it really comes out to be the same thing. Okay, so he did exactly the same thing, just taking many, many more statements. Now we have to understand what was the purpose of Gemara. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was taking all the statements of all the rabbis that were discussing issues and tried to make some sort of arrangement of all this oral law. But now we see, so we wouldn't forget it. Ravashi doesn't necessarily, because we wouldn't forget it, although it could very well be a reason. But the Rambam is going to give us 4 reasons, 4 goals of the Talmud. We'll call out, and he included Kol Divrei HaMedabrim V'Seichel HaMisboinanim Uperish HaMafarshim V'Diktuk HaLachas V'Kiptzam V'Kavash HaKol V'Chachmasa. He took all the words of all the speakers and all the intellect of those who reflect and the explanation of the commentaries. He collected them all up, and he what did it say? V'Kavash HaKol V'Chachmasa, and he compressed it all with his wisdom. And also with the wisdom that Hashem gave him, and he composed the Talmud.
Whoa.
Now, it's simply why he gives more business to Ravashi than Ravina.
He does.
Earlier, he said Ravina and Ravashi, at
So
least
he did,
until
but
the time of that.
Ravashi is, I guess in the Gemara, they always talk about Ravashi.
So
not
it's
much
it's
Ravina.
it's it says until the Zman of Ravina Ravashi, but really he gives Ravashi the credit for that. He had four main
And isn't that who
intentions.
Menashe came to in his dream? He came to Ravashi.
Yes. So number one is Perush HaMishnah, an explanation of the Mishnah. And everything that came out of it, which includes many things. Whether it be the machlokasim and the explanations, the tainas called maforish, and each one's claims al chavero against his fellow interpreter, vigilu tainas ha'emes, and to reveal the true claims, is a reishis hakavana shinskam. That was the main intention, is to understand pshat in the Mishnah. What did Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi mean to say? That's number one. Vasheni, number two goal is psak hadin. What is the final decision of the halacha?
Sure. One
Person between two that are arguing. That we're arguing in the words of the Mishnah. Or explanation, or new insights that were made new, and it became attached to it. We have to come up with some kind of halacha l'mais. Well, I guess you have some halacha l'maisa, but not as much as we would like. Yes, sir.
So why do we always say you can't paskin from the Gemara?
Well, obviously, there were other people who had to say. There was a Talmud Yerushalmi also. And you know what? It's just obvious that first of all, whatever they say, they didn't say enough. And there'd be further generations where new ideas would come up where they more didn't discuss it. How are you going to paskin from a Gemara about a microwave on Shabbos? Right? Now, also, there are many times have
But they
changed.
do that when they talk about in vitro fertilization. They go back to the Gemara and they find some kind
I
of.
understand,
Right?
but you couldn't you can't, there's no psak halacha on in vitro from the Gemara, is there? No, we can't paskin on a lot of things from the Gemara alone, because even the Gemara didn't list every single possibility. You can get ideas and fundamentals
and concepts,
but most Hilchah Shabbos we would not know from the Gemara. Gemara doesn't say straight out simple ideas, and it just, even though they knew the halacha from it, but I don't think we did.
We did.
And it went through further changes, as halacha will go through further changes, because situations change, generations change, and all that.
Technology changes.
So we can't look at what was decided 1,500 years ago to have the same application as it is now. We have to figure out how to make the applications. Okay, but there's still a lot more, and in any standard Gemara, there's still way not enough information. Now, Ashlishi, what was the third point? It was that the subsequent generations extrapolated new halachas from the Mishnah. Vigoli ha'ikar, and revealing the main thing, varaya shaharabam, proofs that they gave, the sam chalem atanoim hamedaber al divrei Mishnah, and the rabbis of the Gemara, the Tanoim, relied on those words that were explained in Mishnah, until they arranged what they arranged, and all the new decrees that were made from Rabbi Yehuda Levi until Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, until Ravashi, with all kinds of new gzeres, all kinds of new things. That's the third. Now, Ravi, and the fourth, drushos, the homiletics, shem ru'uyos lafi inyan, that are fitting according to the topic, kol perish nistaben lios drush, whenever there was something to darshan in that topic, that's fitting. And this now takes us to a very, very long discussion on the Agarit. So before I want to get there, there's still something else we would like to talk about. And what we want to talk about is, it would seem from the Gemara, from the Rambam, that who wrote the Mishnayos, it seems it was Rabbi Yehuda Yossi wrote the Mishnayos. Just like Rav Ashi wrote the Talmud.
Yeah.
But we would be remiss if we would let that go as it was, because we see that it's not so simple.
Right. Weren't there a lot of Mishnayos written before him even?
And let us
What we say,
take,
Stam Mishnah Rav Meir he is what we usually say.
yeah, that could be his statement, but who wrote it?
It's not. this thing
Why
he
is
wrote.
this not? Oh,
There you go.
okay. We got one second. Let me close this. There's two things I want to open up at the same time, and I hope that we can see it. Let's see. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's not going to work. Hang on. Give me a minute. I don't want that. That's going to be a hard, as much as some of these things are good, but this preview is the best one. Preview doesn't make any trouble for you. It just gives you the text. Okay. So we're going to have two next to each other. Who wrote the Mishnah and Talmud? And here is, again, let's make a picture. And where is that little thing? There it
Make it
is.
bigger. There you go.
Hang on. Yeah. Can we see the picture?
Oh, yeah.
So let's figure out, where are the Jews in Bavel? Where is Bavel?
Isn't that Iraq, Iran?
Well, somewhere over here, right?
Yeah.
Now, Baghdad is a very important place to think about. You got Baghdad over here. Now, basically, remember the story of the four rabbis who got lost on the sea, and they got captured, and then they got separated into different parts of this part of the world. This is how the Torah moved from Bavel, which was till about the 900s, till it moved into North America,
Not North America.
North Africa, Spain, France, etc. And where you've got, so anyway, there was a certain rabbi who lived in Kairouan over here, who had certain shilas that he asked. And he asked that of Rav Sreira Gaon, who lived in Baghdad, okay? And therefore, and we will see shortly that there are different texts to certain things. So let's take a look and have a little bit of a historical class for a moment about Rav Sreira Gaon, who was head of the Pompadisa Yeshiva and was born in the year 900, etc., etc. This is the Gaonim time. We can skip a lot of these things. That's not important. Oh, but Rav Sreira Gaon was a direct descendant of the royal family of David. His official seal bore a likeness of a lion, the symbol of the tribe of Yehuda, likened to a lion from which King David ascended. Okay, as Rav Sreira Gaon states in his Igeris, his ancestors held the position of Reish Galusa. But when the office of Reish Galusa became increasingly secular and political, they relinquished the title and dedicated themselves to their position of Torah and spiritual leadership as Gaonim and heads of the Yeshiva Pumbedisa. In the year about 968, Rav Sreira Gaon was elected as head of the Yeshiva Pumbedisa. Thereupon, he transferred the duties of Gaon to son Rav Hai Gaon, who had become famous as Gaon in his own right. Rav Sreira Gaon devoted himself completely to the affairs of the Yeshiva, which was the highest academy and Torah authority of the Jewish people at the time. Sreira Gaon reached a ripe old age of about 100 years. Toward the end of his life, him and his son Rav Hai Gaon were both arrested by Caliph al-Sadir as a result of calumnies and false accusations. Their properties were confiscated, their lives were in danger, where they were later released and allowed to resume their high office activities. This sad experience eventually undermined self, blah, blah, blah. Now, like all the Gaonim before him, Rav Sreira Gaon received inquiries from various Jewish communities near and far on various aspects of Jewish laws and customs, requests for explanations of difficult texts of the Talmud, for guidance, communal affairs, and the like. In his long life, Rav received many such requests and inquiries, but only a few of his replies and legal rulings have been preserved, as well as scholarly explanation and elucidation of different passages of the Mishne work. Most of the answers were written in Aramaic, the language of the Talmud, as in the case of the preceding Gaonim. Some replies, however, were written in Arabic, which was widely in those days in the many countries that were under the rule of the Arabs, whose influence had spread from Spain in the west to India in the east. Some of these have been translated to Hebrew. The most famous work of Rav Gaon is his epistle, Igeret, which he wrote in reply to an inquiry from the Jewish community of Kairouan in North Africa. The inquiry was addressed to Rav Gaon by Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the famed Gaon Rabbeinu Nissan in the year 986.
Wow.
The answer of Rav Gaon came in the form of long letters, became famous as the Geras Rav Gaon. Wow. Now, the reason we're not going to learn that is because Rambam kind of took that and just elaborated on it. The questions that he asked were, how was the Mishne, the oral law, recorded? Was the Mishne written down in stages, beginning with Anshe Lela to Rabbi Yossi, who finally compiled and ended the 6 tractates, or did Rabbi Yehuda write down for the first time all the Mishnas? In that case, was the Mishne recorded by earlier Tanoim? What is the reason for the sequence of the Mishnah tractates, etc.? Why did not Rabbi Yossi incorporate the Tosefta, the important additional Tanaic teachings, etc.? Why were there the Brisas left out of the Mishnah? How was the Gemara written? In what order did the Saporaim, the Talmud scholars afterwards, what did they do, etc.? Now, why did they want to know all this? Because they're having trouble from the Karoim, who questioned the whole Torah Shabbal Peh. And of course, we know what the Karoims were all about, and the rabbis had to debate them. That's why they wrote this letter. It was therefore important indeed necessary that the Jews in Kairouan to know about the Mishnah and Talmud, a related source of halacha, and how all this body of knowledge was transmitted up to the closing of the Talmud. Okay, and thereby, after by the Torah scholars every generation, continued the chain of tradition right up to Rav Gaon. So he answered all this and added a lot more. He begins by explaining the Masorah, etc., etc. This all leading up to what I really want to get to.
Okay.
So he goes on to explain the nature of the Mishnah, Sefta Bryce, and our earlier collection of halachas had been preserved, blah, blah, blah. Then he describes the Amoraim. A great deal of information is there, okay? But in reconstructing the chain of tradition, so relies mainly on the records of the Babylonian academies themselves. Now, these are both written records as well as those transmitted orally.
They were one of the yeshivas went for over 1,500 years.
Yeah. Anyway, so then he goes through all the scholars, etc., etc. Okay. Reb Gaon, as mentioned, wrote his Igeris in Aramaic, the language of the Talmud, and all the response of the Gaon. It was later translated to Hebrew and other languages. Now, 2 versions of the Igeris. This is what we wanted. The so-called Spanish version
And the French version.
and the French version.
Seriously.
The versions differ in some respects, but the Spanish version is believed to be more accurate because the Talmud scholars in Spain were in closer touch with the Gaonim, either directly or through Kairouan, than the scholars of France.
Whoa.
Indeed, Yosef, the son of Shmuel Hanogid, in Spain, was married to the daughter of Nisan, the son of Rabbi Yaakov and Nisan, to whom the Igeris was sent.
Wow.
No doubt Rav Shmuel had a true copy of the original Igeret.
Whoa.
Thanks to the farsightedness of Rav Gaon, his Igeret, written in the view of Kairouan for their personal information, became a document for all times.
Wow.
Okay, why am I telling you all this? It's a nice history lesson, but what's the point? The point is, here is 2 different versions of the letter when it comes to the aspect with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now, what did we say is the more accurate text?
The one from Spain.
Spain. So let's see what he writes. V'lohoya chad mina rishonim dekosav midam atsof yomei d'Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And not one of the initial sages formally wrote anything down until the end of the days of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So that is the Sephardi version.
Wow.
That's the Spanish version.
Wow.
But Totzas HaTzarfati,
What do they
the
say?
French version, Vatsof yomeho derabanan leka de kosev midam koleker. Until the end of the days of the rabbis of the Talmud, there was no formal writing of rabbinic literature at all.
Whoa.
So it comes out according to the French version.
It looks like Ravashi wrote the whole thing
So
down.
Ravashi, now, so what did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi do? Obviously, he must have formulated
Yes,
things.
yes.
He clearly formulated, made an order, but didn't write anything down. Now, obviously, where do you think the Rambam is going to fall in line?
With the Spanish.
With the Spanish text. So the
He's a
Rambam,
Sfard through and through.
so the Rambam goes with this. Now, there later times, but interestingly, though, we know we have the Ritva.
Yes.
The Ritva, Rav Yom Tov Azvili, okay, and he is sort of like in between
Yes.
rabbi, because then later on in history, the French and the Spanish, got rabbis like in I think Provence or whatever, was more on the border, etc.
Right.
So they were able to synthesize a little bit. And he says the book Megillus Tainus, remember that more quotes Megillus Tainus often with the different holidays, was used because other books were not written during the days of the sages of the Talmud. So this is interesting because the Ritva is not strictly a Frenchie, but really it's like a combination of the Spanish and French. So therefore it remains not 100% clear. The Rambam clearly will tell you, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote down, because he clearly went with the Spanish text. The Ritva was a couple hundred years later, it was the 1300s. And there already we get a mix of the French and Spanish. And he seems to say, if other things weren't written in the days of the sage of Talmud, except Megillus Tainus, that would exclude the Mishnayos. So it remains a very interesting historical question. What is the exact answer to this? One thing we still give Rabbi Yehuda Nasi credit, there's no question about it. He put it together. The Rambam clearly holds. He wrote it down and people had to analyze it. There are other, and it could be that is the authoritative version.
Wow.
And others say not. And that's the same chart, but not as nice as the other one we showed you. Okay. So that leaves us tomorrow, Mirz Hashem, to start a full-length discussion on the Agadata.
Whoa.
And that's going to take a couple lessons, believe it or not. He has a lot to say, very wordy on this topic. Okay, you got a really good class today. Baruch Hashem.
It's not a good class, and if you're here in person, even better.
Okay, stop the share. Have a wonderful day. We will continue the Rambam tomorrow night and the rest of the week at 9:30.
Wow.